right.
You're going to get me fired.
Good morning and welcome to this week's issue of City Current. We've got a great guest on tap for today who's going to be talking to us about everybody's favorite topic around City Hall, and that is the 2016 budget. So with me today is Assistant City Manager Casey Toomay. Casey, good morning.
Hi, good morning.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Great.
Great.
So budget is the explicit kind of priority around here these days, and I just figured maybe you could give us a little overview, because the budget is not a document that just gets approved and without any sort of input from anybody. There's a long process that starts, and I would love for you to tell folks, like, when does your job actually start on the budget, or is there ever a time when it starts and stops?
I think usually probably about February is kind of when we start talking budget. Departments start gathering information, looking at what they spent the prior year, trying to figure out what adjustments are needed to make on that. And so February is kind of the department month. Then we move into March, and that's where we start sending out notices to the different outside agency groups that apply for city funding typically. We try to get that application looked at, see if there's any adjustments that need to be made to that, and get that sent out. Then April, we sort of bring the public into the process. We get the City Commission to start talking about the budget calendar for the summer, set study sessions where we can figure out what different topics we want to spend a little more time maybe drilling down into. Then we host a number of public listening sessions over the course of the summer. So that gets us into May, June. And then we try to shoot to have a city manager's recommended budget to the City Commission around the 4th of July holiday. And then again, after that, there's more opportunity for public input on that document. That's just the recommended amount for the city's budget. We have to have an official budget hearing, but at that point, we've had several opportunities to hear from the public. That budget hearing we usually have around the first part of August, and then Kansas statutes say we have to have the budget adopted by August 25th. So I'd say the bulk of the work on the budget really happens maybe from June to August.
Gotcha. So basically, if I'm a city department, you start interacting with city departments in February, and is it, give us all of your wish list, everything that you want, and then we'll kind of whittle it down and talk with you about the things that are most important. How does that work with city departments?
Sort of like the way you described. I think in February that's kind of where they're at with their wish lists. It helps to see where they ended up the prior year, to see what they're really spending. Remember, a budget is just a plan, so we usually don't spend everything that we budget. It's just an amount on paper that we say this is the amount of authority we have to spend in a particular year. We can't spend more than that without going back and amending that document, but we can certainly spend less, and we try to do that by managing our expenditures. So the departments start maybe with their, I hate to call it wish list, but maybe a list of all of the needs that they have without maybe regard to financial constraints. Mm-hmm. Then we try to provide a projection of what we think the revenues are going to be for the next coming year. And then based on that, we come up with kind of a target of stay flat, or you can go up, but you can't go up more than 2%, or you can't go down, or I'm sorry, you can go down, but we think we need to go down 2%. So we kind of try to give them a little bit of a set of parameters for those submittals that they then get to us. They're actually going to get them to us next Monday.
So they basically go back with a set amount of money based upon last year's budget, recommended increase, decrease, et cetera. And then they basically have to find a way to work, let's say $100,000. If their total list of needs is $500,000, they basically have to whittle that down to $100,000 and figure out how to make that happen.
That's what we ask for them to do in their initial submittal, mm-hmm. and then we spend between the time that we get those materials from the departments until the city manager's recommended budget comes out, trying to align how all of those priorities from the different departments match up to the priorities that the commission sets for us. So that's kind of what we do to develop the city manager's recommended budget, is take that list. I kind of see it as a funnel or a filter. We get all of the materials from the departments and we funnel them down and filter them down to better align with the priorities that the commission expresses and the resources that are available.
So we have two primary sources of revenue, sales tax and property tax. Talk about how those have changed over the years. Like property taxes, you said based upon the, you alluded to it, based upon like the assessed valuation. Talk about that whole process and how it works.
So the county is actually the agency or the form of government that assesses property. So every January 1st, the county sets the assessed value for properties. So they go out and look at the market value. The state has different rates at which taxes are assessed based on the different type of property that you have. So a residential property, for example, is assessed at a different rate than a commercial property. Those values are sometimes appealed by different property owners. So the county spends the majority of the year handling those appeals, sending out the notifications, and coming up with an estimate of what they think the assessed valuation is for the community. We usually receive an estimate from them around July 1st, and that tells us sort of their best guess at that particular point in the year what they think the assessed value will be for the coming year. So property taxes for 2016 are actually based on assessed valuation as of January 1st, 2015. So once we get that estimate, we can say, depending on whether that assessed valuation goes up, stays the same, or goes down, what the property tax revenue will be generated by our existing mill levy. So that's really important because, as you mentioned, that's a big piece of our revenue pie. Mm-hmm. And in recent years, we've seen little, if any, growth in that assessed valuation. So we have a pretty good graph that shows, if you look at a 10-year span of time, the graph looks a little bit different. You see a pretty steady growth pattern. If you look at a 5-year span of time, it kind of flattens out. So
because of the recession that we had and trying to come out of that and that sort of thing.
Right. So what that's meant for us is that our existing mill levy has generated the same amount of revenue or very little additional growth. And so that, I think, has been one of the reasons why, in addition to our expenditure growth that we've had, why we've looked at mill levy increases in recent years.
So we have that, and then we've got sales tax, which has actually been doing pretty good this year. I think we're up 5% year to date, which is pretty amazing. Talk about how that's changed over the course of the last few years, and because I think something that was really hard for me to grasp when I got elected was every time somebody spends $1 in Lawrence, that's important for us to continue to do what we do.
Yeah.
So talk about sales tax kind of being the other piece of that revenue pie.
The sales tax is sort of the other larger revenue source for the city's general operating fund. Keep in mind we also have service charges, so your water bill and those kinds of things. But as you mentioned, the city's general operating fund, which is sort of where the bulk of city services live, the major revenue source for that, one of them is sales tax. And you're right that we are up this year, and that's been pretty consistent. In the past few years, we've seen pretty healthy growth in our sales tax revenue.
So talking about the opportunities for public input, we just held a public meeting last week. We'll be holding another one this Thursday. Talk about how you've kind of structured that and maybe just kind of give a quick recap of the meeting last week.
Sure. What we did and what we'll do again on the 14th is took kind of the city budget and tried to narrow it down to about 20 different categories of city services or functions. Street maintenance, social services, police, fire, park and park maintenance, those kinds of large categories of services. We put those on poster boards all around the room, and we asked people, in terms of priorities, should we place a higher priority on a particular service, the same amount of priority that we're putting on it now, or maybe less priority? and we asked people to go around and vote with everybody's favorite thing, little sticky dots. And then we had a facilitated conversation sort of after that voting process of let's talk about where priorities were. We did ask that people not put all their dots in one place. We gave people 20 dots, and we asked that people actually went to each one of the different categories of service and vote between a higher priority, same level of priority, or a less level of priority. And people did that. So we had a really good conversation, I thought, about some of kind of the observations that folks made after everybody put their dots where they thought they should go. And we tried to go around and maybe talk about the ones that received the most dots in the plus column. So to kind of try to get folks to expand on why they put their dot in the plus column and what that meant to them. We had pretty good conversations about traffic safety and sort of pedestrian improvements that we might need in the community. We talked a little bit about police service and why folks put a plus in that column. We talked a little bit about some of the areas where maybe we had some minuses too, why people thought maybe we didn't need to make things as much of a priority as we had in the past. So I anticipate we'll use the exact same format on the 14th. The conversation may or may not be the same depending on who shows up and what they think in terms of the priorities that we have.
So I think we had 11, it's a great recap. I think we had 11 voters from what I counted. And I think the most negatives that any category received was 4. And I was really kind of in a listening mode more so than anything last week. But my big observation that I'm kind of learning and figuring out is there's not a lot of stuff that we say no to here. We have very high expectations. Our community expects a lot of us, and we don't really want to fund anything less. We want to fund it the same or more, but you have to have creative ways to pay for that. So we got to keep hoping that sales tax revenues increase, and look at hopefully the county's assessed valuation going up, and there's really not a lot of different places that we can take money from in the sense of it going up without raising taxes. So last thing I wanted to ask you, this has been on a lot of people's minds. The state legislature is continuing to make cuts, deal with huge budget shortfalls. It's a question that I get a lot. How much does what happens at the state affect the city? And if they obviously it has effects on our schools. It's got huge effects on our schools. But as far as the city budget goes and the city budget coffers, and specifically, this legislative session is wrapping up, coming to a close. But next year, if they go and start taking away, money from different places, what impact does that have on the city of Lawrence?
Fortunately or unfortunately, we are not as maybe dependent on the state for revenue as some other units of government. In the past, we have been, but over the years, the state has kind of chipped away at that over time. So most of the revenue that we receive from the state is really just a pass-through. For example, sales tax. The state collects sales tax revenue, but then they pass it back to the cities or the counties where those sales tax were generated. So from a revenue coming in standpoint, at this point, not much of what's happening in Topeka directly affects the city budget. It's more of an indirect effect. For example, some of the social service agencies that the city provides funding to, I know have been more directly impacted by state budget cuts. And as a result, they're looking for revenue from other sources. So we've seen increases in the requests from some of those agencies for funds to make up the difference. Another sort of indirect impact, another revenue source for the city is proceeds from liquor tax. And that's an area in the recent past where the state has said, well, yeah, we pass through those funds back to the cities where they're generated, but we don't have to. And so not very long ago, we had a conversation about what that might do to the city budget. And it's almost, we get about almost $2 million from liquor tax proceeds. And if the state were to decide to withhold transferring that money back, which I don't think they're considering at this point, but at that point, we had conversations about how that would directly impact the city, and it caused us to have a good conversation about priorities and what programs we probably would not be able to continue to fund. So that was an example of how it might impact, but right now we are a little bit more removed from what's happening in Topeka than some other folks.
For now, at least.
For now.
For now. All right. Well, Assistant City Manager Casey Toomay, thanks for joining me this morning.
Great, thank you.
Welcome. We want to welcome next week a neighborhood guest that's going to be chatting with us for next week's issue of City Current. And I would encourage all of you to attend our city budget session. It's going to be this Thursday.
Yep.
Fire Station number 5.
Yep.
At
6:30 p.m.
So 6:30 to 8 o'clock, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. Until next time, have a great week. Take care.